They say loyalty is rare, but when you find it, it lasts a lifetime. Sometimes it doesn't come from people. It comes from those who stand by you in silence, through every storm, every battle, every lonely night. This is the story of Frank, a war veteran, and Bravo, the faithful dog who once saved lives on the battlefield and never stopped saving his. If you believe true loyalty deserves to be remembered, stay with me as we uncover their journey together. And don't forget to follow, like, and share your thoughts, because stories like this must never be forgotten. They say time erodes many things, strength, wealth, even memory. But there are bonds that remain unbroken, forged not by chance but by fire and blood. Frank Sullivan was 71 years old, a man whose body bore the scars of 3 tours in Fallujah. He lived alone in a small apartment, his only constant companion an aging dog with a gray muzzle and clouded eyes. The dog's name was Bravo, and he was no ordinary pet. He was a Marine in his own right, a military working dog who had once sniffed out a hidden web of explosives and saved 4 lives. Frank often thought back to that day in 2005, the day Bravo kept death itself at bay. When regulations dictated that Bravo should remain in service or be reassigned, Frank had pushed through a mountain of forms, pulled every string he had and insisted, "We came in together, we leave together now." It was the kind of oath only a soldier would understand. Since then, Bravo had grown old, and Frank's steps had grown slower, but neither had ever considered leaving the other behind. Every morning, they made the same quiet ritual. Frank would take Bravo to the park and sit on the same worn bench. He carried a book but rarely read more than a page or two. Instead, he spoke to Bravo in a low voice, the way one might talk to an old comrade over coffee. He told him about the weather, about aches in his joints, about the world that kept moving on without them. Sometimes he recalled their deployments, the sandstorm in Romani, where Bravo had never lost the trail, the long nights where Bravo's body heat had kept him alive. His words were simple, but his tone was one of trust, like confiding in someone who had earned the right to hear. It was during one of these mornings that the peace was broken. A group of young men noticed Frank leaning toward his dog, whispering as if Bravo might answer back. They laughed, loud and cruel. One pulled out his phone. "Check this out," he said, as the camera caught Frank stroking Bravo's fur, pausing now and then, waiting as though for a reply. Old man thinks his dog talks back. Their laughter echoed through the park, careless and sharp, while Bravo, too tired to lift his head, simply pressed closer to Frank's side. Within the hour, the video was online. The caption read, "Crazy old vet, best friend is a dog who can't even understand him." The comments piled up, strangers mocking what they didn't understand. To them, it was a joke. To Frank, it was nothing new. He had lived through the sound of mortar shells and the stares of civilians who never cared to know his story. He did not raise his voice. He only smoothed his hand over Bravo's back and whispered, "It's all right, boy. Let them laugh. You never left me behind when the shells were falling." Later that day, the park manager approached him. The man shifted uncomfortably, not meeting Frank's eyes. "Mr. Sullivan, we've had some complaints about you talking to yourself. It makes other visitors uncomfortable." "I'm talking to my dog," Frank replied, calm and steady. "Yes, well," the manager hesitated. "Perhaps you could do that at home. Some parents are concerned about their children seeing unusual behavior." There was no anger in Frank's face, only the quiet wariness of a man who had weathered greater storms. He nodded once, gathered his belongings, and stood. Bravo struggled to his feet, his joints stiff with arthritis, but he moved anyway, determined as ever to follow. Together they began the slow walk toward the exit. Behind them, laughter trailed like smoke. Ahead of them, silence and a long road home. To the world, it looked like an old man muttering nonsense to a sick dog. But to Frank, it was the same vow that had carried them both through years of darkness. Semper fidelis, always faithful. And so they walked on, sent up outside, against a world that no longer understood what loyalty truly meant. 2 weeks after that humiliating day in the park, another blow came. This one colder, sharper, and far more personal. A letter slid beneath Frank's apartment door. He bent to pick it up, his knuckles stiff with age, and read the words that threatened to strip away what little stability he still had. Eviction notice. The letter claimed violations, unauthorized pet maintenance, and failure to provide documentation of service animal status. Frank had submitted that paperwork not once but 3 times. The military records were buried deep in classified files from operations he and Bravo had endured. Bureaucracy had never been kind to men like him. Now it was forcing him out of the only roof he had left. There were no children to call, no relatives to turn to. His pension, modest and dwindling, barely covered his food and Bravo's medication. With little choice, Frank sold what remained of his possessions. His medals, a few books, even the television that had been his one distraction. In their place, he bought an old RV, paint peeling, engine coughing, but big enough for 2. He parked it near a lake where he and Bravo had once trained before deployment. The place felt like memory, wild, quiet, unjudging. Each morning, Frank matched his pace to Bravo's slowing steps. The dog's body was failing, hips stiff, breath shallow, eyes milky with age. Yet his loyalty never faltered. Even when his paws dragged, even when the cold wind made him tremble, Bravo stayed at Frank's side as though tethered by invisible orders still ringing in his ears. Then one bitter morning, the inevitable came. Bravo stumbled, legs twitching, body convulsing in sudden, violent seizures. Frank dropped to his knees, gathering the trembling frame into his arms. His voice cracked, but his movement stayed steady. "Hold on, buddy, I've got you. Just hold on." Panic drove him forward, each step agony on his own arthritic joints, until he reached the nearest veterinary clinic. He burst inside, cradling Bravo as though carrying a wounded Marine from the battlefield. "Please," Frank begged the receptionist, desperation breaking through his calm exterior. "He needs help immediately. I don't have much money, but I'll work it off. Anything. Just save him." The young woman barely glanced at the dog gasping in his arms. "We don't provide charity services," she said flatly, tapping at her computer. "There's an animal shelter across town. They offer low-cost euthanasia if that's what you're looking for." The word hit Frank like a bullet. Euthanasia. He stared at her, the room tilting around him. "No," he rasped. "I don't want to put him down. I want to save him." "Sir, treatment requires payment up front. It's policy." Her tone never softened. Frank sat heavily in the waiting area, Bravo still shaking against his chest. He did not cry. Combat had taught him to lock pain inside, but his weathered hands trembled as they stroked Bravo's fur in slow, rhythmic motions. To him, this was not a dog. This was a brother in arms, a Marine who had saved lives. And now the world wanted to discard him like a broken tool. A teenager loitering near the clinic recognized him from the viral video. With cruel curiosity, he raised his phone, recording as Frank whispered again to Bravo, soothing him like a child. "Easy, Corporal. Steady now. We've survived worse." Hours later, that clip was online with captions mocking him again. Dog whisperer still spilling war stories to his 4-legged therapist. Memes spread, laughter multiplied. Frank ignored it. He carried Bravo back to the RV, wrapping his own jacket around the frail body. That night, he stayed awake, watching each rise and fall of his friend's chest. When Bravo whimpered, Frank crushed his own pain medication into water, prioritizing the dog's comfort over his own aching bones. He whispered stories into the dark, his voice steady even when his heart cracked. "Remember Fallujah? Remember how you kept me warm in the dirt? Your turn now, Bravo. My turn to keep you safe." The world saw only a crazy old man muttering to a dog, but the tag still hanging from Bravo's collar told another story. It bore the inscription, K9 USMC 4521, Purple Heart, saved 4 lives, Suaves. To Frank, he was not a pet. He was Corporal Bravo, a Marine who had never been formally discharged from duty, and Frank, true to his oath, would not abandon him. With the last of his pension, Frank visited a small feed store where a sympathetic clerk sold him antibiotics meant for farm animals. It wasn't proper treatment, but it was all he could do. At night, he read aloud from his dog-eared paperbacks, his voice a shield against the silence, just as he had once read to Bravo under thunder that sounded like artillery. One evening, a jogger passed the RV, seeing only an old man hunched over a dying dog. She muttered under her breath, "That weird homeless vet," and quickened her pace. Frank heard, but he didn't flinch. Civilians had never understood the code. The only opinion that mattered to him was panting softly beside him, fighting for every breath. The mockery grew online. The struggle deepened. But Frank's vow never wavered. No man left behind, not even this one. And as Bravo's chest rose and fell under his hand, Frank whispered again, the only words that truly defined them both. Semper Fidelis, always faithful. The night stretched long and uncertain. Frank dozed in his chair, his jacket draped over Bravo's frail body, every shallow breath making his chest tighten. When dawn broke, the RV felt colder than the desert nights he remembered. The world outside moved on. Joggers, fishermen, families passing by the lake. Yet inside, it was just a man and his fading comrade. But the world had seen. The cruel video from the clinic had gone viral, stirring not only laughter, but something else. Anger in the hearts of men who knew what Bravo meant. 3 hours later, the crunch of gravel signaled a presence outside. A black SUV, unmarked yet unmistakably official, rolled to a stop. Its engine cut off with surgical precision. The door opened, and 5 Marines stepped out, their dress blues pressed to perfection, their movements synchronized as if marching on parade. They approached the battered RV not with suspicion, but with reverence. The oldest, a master sergeant with ribbons glinting across his chest, knocked firmly. "Mr. Frank Sullivan." Frank opened the door, Bravo still in his arms. Confusion flashed across his face at the sweat of the uniformed men. The master sergeant straightened, hand rising in a crisp salute. "Sir, I am Master Sergeant Reynolds. These are Lieutenant Harris, Corporal Martinez, Lance Corporal Wilson, and Private First Class Dawson." Frank's hand went up instinctively, returning the salute with muscle memory carved decades ago. He stood straighter, despite the ache in his back. Lieutenant Harris stepped forward, voice steady but heavy with emotion. "Sir, Bravo pulled me out of a compound in Romani when my team was pinned down. He saved my life. And you." Harris's throat tightened before he pushed on. "You never abandoned him when regulations would have taken him away. Now it's our turn. Neither of you will be left behind." All 5 Marines saluted again, not just to Frank, but to Bravo, the weak, trembling dog in his arms. The gesture, sharp and silent, spoke more than words ever could. "We're here to transport you both to the Naval Veterinary Hospital at Bethesda," Reynolds explained. "Bravo has been reactivated under honorary service status, part of the Battle Buddies Forever program. Full medical care is authorized." Frank's weathered face held no smile, but his eyes glistened with something he had long suppressed. He shook his head slightly, whispering, "Bravo can hardly stand. He may not—" "Sir," Corporal Martinez interrupted gently, "we're prepared for that." From the SUV, they retrieved a stretcher designed for canine patients. With practiced care, they helped Frank transfer Bravo onto it, strapping him securely but gently, every motion executed with the dignity of handling a fellow Marine. Frank's voice cracked as he spoke. "The people who filmed us, the ones who laughed—" "They're being addressed, sir," Reynolds said firmly. "The Commandant himself saw the footage this morning. He had strong words about respect for those who've served and for our 4-legged Marines." Reporters soon arrived, their cameras clicking, eager to capture the scene. But Reynolds raised a hand, blocking their path. "This isn't a photo op. This is about doing right by our own." A few flashes slipped through, but the Marines shielded Frank and Bravo as they guided them to the waiting vehicle. Inside Bethesda's Naval Veterinary Hospital, the sterile white halls became a sanctuary. Specialists in K9 geriatric medicine moved quickly, surrounding Bravo with expertise and equipment Frank could never have afforded. IVs were placed, scans were run, treatments prepared. For the first time in months, Frank felt a weight lift. Someone else was fighting alongside him. News of Bravo's story spread beyond the mocking videos. The teenager who had once filmed Frank was identified as an ROTC cadet. His commanding officer confronted him, and the boy, shaken by shame, went on camera with an apology. His voice trembled. "I didn't know. I thought it was just an old man talking to a pet. I didn't know Bravo was a decorated war dog. I didn't know about their history." Meanwhile, support poured in from veterans across 3 states. They pooled funds, pulled favors, and within days secured a small house for Frank, mortgage-free near the lake he loved. The Homeowners Association, usually strict about rules, voted unanimously to allow Bravo, even celebrated his presence. One evening, Frank sat by Bravo's bedside in the hospital, the soft beep of machines echoing in the room. For once, he wasn't alone. Imas. Marines stopped by in shifts, sitting quietly, some offering a nod, others a word of gratitude. To them, Bravo wasn't just a bind. He was a Marine who had stood watch, saved lives, and carried a burden no civilian could measure. Frank leaned closer to Bravo, his voice low but strong. "See, Corporal? I told you, we don't walk alone. Not now, not ever." For the first time in weeks, Bravo's tail thumped faintly against the bed. The bond, unbroken, had drawn the Marines back. The old man and his dog were no longer a spectacle for ridicule. They were a living testament to loyalty and the brotherhood that never forgets its own. The weeks at Bethesda passed in a blur of white corridors, hushed voices, and careful hands. Bravo, though old and fragile, responded to the treatments. His seizures eased, his breathing steadied, and though he would never be young again, he found a measure of comfort that had been denied him for too long. Frank rarely left his side, sleeping in a chair beside the bed, one hand always resting on Bravo's fur as though keeping guard. Then came the day Frank had never expected. The hospital staff, together with Marines from near and far, organized a formal ceremony. The small auditorium filled quickly, uniforms old and new, ribbons of every color, faces lined with history. At the front, a podium bore a medal that had long ago been authorized but never presented, the K-9 Service Medal, awarded to Bravo for his courage in the line of duty. When Frank entered with Bravo at his side, the room fell silent. The old Marine's back was straighter than it had been in years, and Bravo, despite his age, sat with surprising dignity, service vest secured around his frame. A military photographer adjusted his camera as the commanding officer stepped forward. "Today," the officer declared, voice carrying with solemn pride, "we honor not just a dame, but a Marine. K-9 Bravo, Purple Heart recipient, savior of 4 lives in Fallujah, and steadfast companion to Sergeant Frank Sullivan. His service represents the loyalty and courage that define our Corps." Frank accepted the medal on Bravo's behalf. The weight of it in his hand felt heavier than the ribbons he had once worn on his own chest. At that moment, Bravo shifted, raising his paw and placing it firmly against Frank's arm. The photographer's shutter clicked, capturing the image that would endure. A graying dog, eyes clouded but spirit unbroken, saluting alongside the man who had never abandoned him. The ceremony did not end there. As Frank and Bravo prepared to leave, the doors opened once more. Dozens of Marines, some active duty, some long retired, stood in formation, creating a path of honor. Their boots struck the floor in unison as hands rose in salute. Not just for Frank, not just for Bravo, but for the unspoken truth that loyalty knows no rank, no species, no expiration. "Semper Fidelis," Master Sergeant Reynolds murmured as they passed. "Always faithful, both of you." The house gifted by veterans soon became their sanctuary. Nestled near the lake, it offered quiet mornings and gentle paths that Bravo could still manage on his slower days. The neighbors, once strangers, now treated Frank with respect. Children who had once been told to avoid the strange old man now came eagerly, asking permission to pet Bravo. Frank, who had lived in silence for so long, began to teach them how to approach a dog calmly, how to respect his space, how to honor him as more than just a pet. One afternoon, a boy no older than 8 looked up at Frank with wide eyes. "Is your dog a superhero?" Frank's lips curved into a rare, genuine smile. "No, son, he's just a Marine, like me." On Veterans Day, the local elementary school invited Frank and Bravo. Frank declined to speak, preferring the quiet of the back row. But Bravo, wearing his service vest, became the center of attention. Small hands reached out to pat him gently, their teachers whispering lessons about heroes that came in many forms. Back at the park where Frank had once been mocked, a bronze plaque was installed without fanfare, but with immense meaning, dedicated to the service of military working dogs and their handlers. Loyalty beyond words. It stood beside the very bench where laughter had once echoed, now a place of reflection and respect. The final video to circulate online was nothing like the cruel ones before. It showed Frank and Bravo at sunset, sitting by the lake, silhouettes against the sky painted gold. A group of active duty Marines had joined them, silent in reverence. Then, without warning, Bravo lifted his muzzle and released a burning, mournful howl, a sound that carried across the water, at once sorrowful and proud. The men understood. It was remembrance, a tribute to battles fought and lives given. Frank's hand rested on Bravo's back, steady and sure. No words were spoken, because none were needed. In the end, their story was not about pity, nor about spectacle. It was about fidelity, about a man and a dog who never abandoned each other, even when the world turned away. Sacrifice does not always come with applause, and loyalty does not always wear a uniform. Sometimes it is found in the quiet companionship of two souls who endured together, who held fast when everything else fell apart. And as the sun dipped low, painting the water in shades of fire, Frank whispered the words that had bound them both for life. Semper Fidelis, Corporal, always faithful. There are stories that need no embellishment, only remembrance, only honor. And sometimes the greatest heroes walk on four legs beside the ones who walk before them. If you believe loyalty deserves to be treasured, share this story so that no sacrifice, no bond, and no Marine, man or dog, is ever forgotten.